In this section, we'll look at Johnson's first year after his election in 1964, the first year of the real thrust of the Great Society, 1965. Following the 1964 election, Johnson submitted just a flood of legislative proposals, and the overwhelming majority in Congress were Democrats, and they virtually passed everything he asked for. In fact, there was more activity that first year than there even was in the first year of the New Deal. Lyndon Johnson called his Congress of Fulfillment, but critics called it the Johnson's Hip Pocket Congress. Of course, it's most of these programs that Republicans are trying to eliminate or scale back today. To start with, in 1965, Congress passed the Appalachian Regional Development Act of 1965. Appalachia extended from Pennsylvania to northern Alabama and a largely mountainous area encompassing about 17 million people. The per capita income was 40% lower than the national average, and unemployment rate was almost 50%. Anyway, this is not the first time that the president had gone after economic stimulus in this area. You tend to think of Roosevelt's New Deal, their TVA in the New Deal. Anyway, emphasizing economic development rather than handouts, the act provided $1.1 billion in federal subsidies for highway constructions and health centers and resource development. It created the Appalachian Regional Commission, sort of a joint federal-state agency. And also states would design projects to fit their needs and then get the commission's approval, kind of like the CAP program of the Office of Economic Opportunity. Congress passed the Housing and Urban Development Act of 1965. It was the most comprehensive housing program for the poor since Truman's Bill in 1949. It provided federal assistance for the construction of 240,000 additional units of low-rent public housing, and it authorized almost $3 billion in federal grants for urban renewal over a 4-year period. For the first time, direct federal aid for rent subsidies took place. It was a very controversial provision and one that passed over a lot of criticism. Funds were later increased to $8 billion. Critics today say all this emphasis should have been on private ownership. If there's no ownership, the tenants are going to trash the place and so forth. At Johnson's suggestion, Congress also passed legislation creating the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. It was to coordinate all these new housing programs, and Johnson appointed Robert C. Weaver as the first Secretary of HUD, the first black ever elected to the cabinet. Perhaps one of the greatest accomplishments of the Great Society, and one of the most long-lasting, was the Medical Care Act of 1965, which provided for a system of federal health insurance. Of course, this had been proposed all the way back to Truman, and when LBJ signed the Medical Care Act of 1965, he had the elderly Harry Truman looking on. The Medical Care Act created a federally funded program of hospital and medical insurance for the elderly, known as Medicare. Now, it covered most people 65 and older, included a basic health plan that provided up to 90 days of hospital care, 100 days of nursing home care, and 100 home health care visits. A supplementary plan, available to those who paid $3 a monthly premium, covered 80% of the cost of a variety of health services, after a deduction of $50. The money for this came from general revenues and an increased Social Security tax to pay for it. Of course, this is building on the private health insurance through your employer that had grown from World War II. The Medical Care Act also authorized federal funds to the states to provide free health care for the poor and indigent. This was known as Medicaid. In 1965, Congress moved at LBJ's suggestion a complete overhaul of the nation's immigration system, the Immigration Act of 1965. It ended the discriminatory system of national origin immigration quotas that had first been established in 1924. The quotas were set according to the percentage of people from that nation in the U.S. in 1890, which of course were mostly white and Northern European. And what the new Immigration Act did was it looked more at individuals, what they, whether they had family members here, whether they had a job here. It didn't just go on national quotas. The result was that there was a tremendous increase in immigration. In 1965, LBJ moved the federal government into the realm of education in a way that the federal government had never been before. He got through Congress the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. And it, like I said, it ended a 20-year debate over whether the federal government should be involved in elementary and high schools, which traditionally have been controlled by the states. There's nothing in the Constitution about education other than the Constitution saying that the federal government has the right to promote the general welfare. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act provided a $1.3 billion, mainly distributed in aid to schools with large numbers of low-income families. For colleges and university, LBJ got through Congress the Higher Education Act of 1965. For the first time, there was a massive program of federal scholarships and low-interest loans to needy college students. The GI Bill of Rights had provided scholarship money before, but only to veterans. This was available to all who needed low-interest college loans, which of course is how most people pay for colleges today. The funds were eventually set at $650 million. Later in 1966 and 68, additional funds were provided. The bill also provided for money for college libraries and research facilities, as well as funding a national teacher corps to provide and train qualified personnel for schools in poverty-stricken areas. The Higher Education Act of 1965 also provided money for the creation of a National Endowment for the Arts, or the NEA, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. A great society, Johnson argued, should promote these fields, and that would benefit all Americans. It would provide grants and presentations and scholarship in these areas. This concludes the section on the Great Society's first year, 1965.